The Bullseye Cut. Chapter 5. Miles to go. Miles rubbed his eyes tiredly. Last night was awful. He'd barely gotten 2 hours of sleep in, and even that was restless. He wasn't looking forward to going to school, already sleep-deprived, but he supposed that was something he was going to have to get used to, if he was meant to be Spider-Man. He was hoping at least school would be a normal amount of stressful and dramatic. Nothing more, nothing less. He'd been feeling very optimistic about it, too, when he got onto the train. 1 station later, several passengers came in. It was a few minutes later when a spider sense buzzed under his skin. Just a slight warning, nothing major, but enough to grab his attention. He should keep an eye out. A woman stumbled into the seat across from him, and his eyes were drawn to her automatically. She was limping obviously, holding her right knee at an awkward angle. The shorts she was wearing only served to highlight the engorged plum color her knee was turning into. It wasn't her only injury. Bruises went up and down her knees, and a black eye harsh enough to make every person around her edge away. He wasn't going to assume anything about her, but seeing that she was sitting across from him, he couldn't help but take in more and more of her. She had a thin sheen of sand and salt over her skin and in her hair, but her clothes didn't have a speck on them, so she must have changed at some point. She had a slushie in her hand that she slurped from intermittently, as if it contained the gift of life. She looked a little hungover, the way she clutched her head. Her face alone could place her at anywhere between 16 to 22, so he wasn't sure if it was legal, but with the injuries and the weird way she was acting, it didn't paint a pretty picture either way. She had turned to look at him, and his spider sense spiked up again. Was someone targeting her? Should he offer her some support? The girl's eyes widened, and his dangerous sense kicked up another notch. She was now leaning over to him. He was going to be dragged into something harrowing, but he steeled his nerves anyway. He was a random kid in his train, and this random girl had picked him out for no reason whatsoever, and he had to put aside his paranoia to listen to whatever she had to say. "You get the feeling that we're experiencing the same thing twice?" she whispered into his ear. "What?" He blinked. He was expecting a lot of things, but this definitely wasn't it. "Yeah," she nodded, not a hint of mirth in her eyes. "Like, this already happened. Then there was a shift or something to recontextualize the whole scene, and it's happening again. Which is weird, because comics don't really do that. It's more of a written novel thing. That's a terrifying thought." "Huh? What?" The girl giggled suddenly. Sorry. My head's all over the place. Just knocked me out for a second there. I may have a concussion." "Yes, clearly." He should point her towards the hospital and hope she had insurance. "What I meant to say," she continued, still whispering, and he was pretty sure that it was too quiet for any normal person to listen to, but she was looking right at him, so she meant for him to hear. And he was overthinking this. "Stop being paranoid, Miles. This random girl doesn't know your secret identity. God, he needs some sleep." "Is that I'm a big fan of you." He blinked, trying to unwind that sentence. Was he famous as Miles? He made waves at the science fair for sure, but he got the feeling that this wasn't what she was talking about. "You know," the girl shrugged, trying to curb the jittery excitement coursing through her. Then she angled her eyes down to the seat, where her left hand was hanging. She twisted it, bringing her middle and ring fingers into her palm in the twippy spider gesture. Miles's blood froze. How had this woman found out his identity? This was dangerous. She could ruin his entire life. She could sell him out, send villains to his house, destroy his school. Catastrophic visions played in his head, making him dizzy. Shit. He wasn't thinking properly when the train ground to a halt. It didn't matter to him that it might not be his station when he marched off, hand clenched around the girl's wrist. She didn't squeeze tight enough to forcibly drag her, but she followed along quietly. "You okay?" she asked, a little confused. "You look a little freaked out." "A little freaked out?" he asked, trying to force down the hysteria. "How do you know my identity?" he whispered, looking around to see if anyone was listening in. "Great job. I think no one noticed." The still unnamed girl gave him a thumbs up. The worst part about this was how nonchalant she was about the fact that she had the power to ruin his life. "Could you please take this more seriously?" she shrugged, playing with a strand of pink hair. Sorry. It's just my thoughts feel a little fuzzy. As if there's a wall set up in my brain where I can't properly arrange my thoughts and get them out. I can't explain it. It keeps haunting me." "Yes, because you have a concussion," Miles remembered. "Wait, how did you get a concussion?" Her gaze dropped down, letting the excited and ditzy fan persona drop to reveal the quiet, slightly tired girl she'd seen in the train before she recognized him. "It's a long story," she explained. "There's aliens and dimensions and Bullseye, and it's a lot for me." His initial panic was dying down. Okay, she was clearly dealing with shit of her own. She shouldn't have immediately jumped to thinking she would ruin his entire life just because she had figured out his identity. Sure, she could very well still do that, but there was no reason to think that she would. "I've dealt with dimensions before," he offered. "I could help you out." She laughed. "Yeah, I'm aware. Spider-Verse is half of your shtick." "Innocent girl who didn't ask for this," he reminded himself stubbornly. Don't freak out over little things like her knowing way more about spiders than was normal. She's already in a bad place. Don't make it worse. It's unfair that I know both your names and you don't know mine, the girl decided, flashing him a soft smile. So let's start over. Hey there, I'm Gwenpool. Did I mention I'm a fan? Hey Gwen, he nodded, cracking a smile. Gwen's are bad news for Spider-Man. It's Poole, not Stacy, Gwen corrected, sticking her tongue out. I'd consider myself the cooler one, but you can't undo Ghost Spider. She's iconic. So she knew an unnerving amount about people who were not him. Good to know. Terrifying, but at least this wasn't a targeted attack against him. He was going to ask her more about how she got here, maybe what led to her injuries, or if she would be okay with going to the hospital, but the girl kept rambling on. Dude, this is the first good thing that's happened to me in months, she announced, leading the way as they walked. I've been fucking up nonstop ever since Cecil was killed, and after that horrific interaction with Marvel, I just lost all hope that I'd ever meet a hero who actually likes me. Oh, that was heartbreaking. Also, an uncomfortable amount of backstory he couldn't quite unravel. Was she talking about Miss Marvel? They'd met. He should look into that. Also, where the fuck were they going? He voiced that question in a more polite tone. Dear Skull, Gwen shrugged. That's why we got off at your station, right? He hadn't even noticed they were walking along the route he took to school. When had that happened? His eyes strayed to the time on his phone, which was horrifically late. I'm gonna miss first period, he groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. Oh, sorry, Gwen shrunk into herself. I didn't mean to mess with your education or anything. I was just so excited to see you. It's fine, he felt the need to immediately comfort her. Don't worry about it. What about you? What about me? She asked, tilting her head as if it was an absurd question. I mean, do you want to get your injuries checked out? Miles asked, eyes drifting back to look at her utterly wretched knee. Can you go to the hospital? I totally understand if you can for whatever reason, but I'm sure I'll be able to find a nurse or a paramedic or someone to help you. You said you were in an explosion? Got roped into helping squid alien weapons dealers, she agreed. Got a lot of good it did me, huh? Ugh. Lester's going to be so mad at me for running off like this. Ask me something else to distract me. Who's Lester? The question came automatically to mind. Schmuck glared at him. Dude, you're supposed to be distracting me. He's probably going to kill me if he thinks I'm testing his limits, and I'm really trying to forget about my impending doom. It was announced flippantly, as if she didn't mind the whole world knowing, but something told Miles that she was 100% serious about this. But since you asked, Lester's kind of like my boss. He snatched me up a while back and made me his informant and lackey all in one. Oh, and he's Bullseye. That certainly changed things. She worked for a villain, a guy he'd fought against more than a couple of times. But she also seemed like it was completely unwilling, so he was going to assume that she was a victim like any other. Bullseye hadn't come to his home yet to kill him, so at least she was keeping his identity under wraps. Sirens were buzzing in his ears, not the spider sense. Actual sirens were buzzing in his ears. His school was on fire. Miles swore, reaching for his mask and making sure he had slipped on the suit that morning under his clothes. He ducked behind a bush to pull off his civvies and dug the mask into place. There was a rustling sound behind him, and he turned to check on it while shoving his clothes into his backpack. Gwen was on the ground a couple of feet away, changing out of plain clothes and into her own suit in broad daylight. He coughed for a second and looked away sharply. Please don't get in my way, he told her before rushing into the burning building. Being Spider-Man had a lot more firefighting than he had first thought, but over time he learned the basic process. Get in, get everyone out, web up load-bearing pillars to make sure the entire structure didn't collapse. Even if he was closer to this particular building and its occupants, that didn't change. He couldn't let himself get worried about Genki's safety or start contemplating how the fire even started, because he had a job to do. He had to be Spider-Man right now. A blur of pink was in his periphery, a stark contrast to the violent reds and oranges. Gwen Poole. He doubted her abilities before because she looked and acted inexperienced, but she was handling herself like a pro in here, crouched down to avoid the smoke and holding a... Where did she get an axe? Should he be concerned? Nabbed it off one of the fire trucks a while back, she answered, as if she could tell what he was thinking. How'd you know I was going to ask that? He managed out, grabbing a semi-conscious student who was lying crumpled over their desk and escorting them towards the exit. I'd be pretty concerned with the proto-villain got their lethal weapons, she replied dryly. You don't seem like much of a villain to me, he offered, as comforting as he could be. Something splintered and broke from further inside the building. Gwen barreled through the door and rushed towards the noise, Miles following behind her. Smoke was thicker here, and the heat more oppressive. It seemed to be closer to where the fire had broken out in the first place. Miles checked the air filter and the mask one more time and then dove into the fray. Flames were licking up the walls, and it was hard to see exactly where he was going, but his hearing was able to guide him through to the people who needed help. There were only a few people still in, but they were all in serious condition. He slowly helped them up, carrying them over his shoulders as much as he could. One girl, Maria, his mind applied frantically. She sat next to him in chem, lent him a pen one time, and invited him to a pineapple-only party another time. Wheezed for air, and he patted her on the back as best she could. He stumbled towards the exit, getting them to safety the only thing on his mind. Spider sense lanced through his brain. It was his only warning before seconds later, a giant piece of flaming wood was falling from the ceiling. There wasn't enough time to run, to dodge, to do anything. All he could do was bear the brunt of the force himself and hope. A fire axe came flipping through the air, easily cleaving the wood in half, sending fire and splinters raining down around them. Miles whipped his head around to look at the person who threw it. Gwenpool grinned uncertainly at him. He spared her a quick nod before rushing the last victims to safety. The next few minutes, or hours, he wasn't entirely sure, were filled with confusion. There were people he needed to make sure got medical attention. Damage control needed to be done. It was a bombing, according to the police, and the perpetrator needed to be caught if the school could be considered safe again. In all the confusion and activity, he barely had a thought to spare about Gwen Poole, until he had retreated behind one of the many abandoned buses to catch some air and pretend that he was just some random hero with no prior connection to the school. "Hey man," she tapped him on the shoulder, somehow having followed him up. He hid the urge to flinch. How could she be sneaking up on him already? Even Miss Marvel didn't get a pass by his fire sense until 3 months at least. Gwen didn't seem to notice either way, with this same shit-eating grin on her face. "How cool was that?" she gushed. "Can you believe we're really having a team-up? Do you think it would be cooler if I was guest starring in your comic, or if you're in mine? Oh, even better. They give us a whole mini-series of our team-up a la Spider-Man/Deadpool. Great." She devolved into crazy talk. This is what he needed right now. She'd been serious and professional before, but it seemed that mask was slipping. Or was this zany version of her another mask, to hide the hurt sincerity he'd seen before? It didn't matter, he decided. It didn't matter that she was suddenly talking about comic books and tie-ins, or that she'd worked for some really, really shitty people, or that all it would take was one bad day to ruin the lives of a lot of people he cared about. She was a good person, and incredibly smart, and he needed to listen to her. "Well, what are we waiting for?" Gwen asked, casually pulling out a handgun. "Holy fuck," checking the chamber. "Let's go, partner." "Go where?" he asked, feeling completely left out of the loop. "To the Bomber's house. You know his house, right?" "Why would I know where the Bomber lives? I don't even know who they are." "Sure you do. It's that guy you ran into the ceramics lab a while back, remember?" she reminded him. That was weird. He'd almost forgotten about that, but now that she mentioned it, it all came flooding back. "Right. He's Damien. We take English Lit together," he agreed. "Had a group project once, so I went over to his house, but he didn't seem to like me very much. Not a fun experience." "There we go," Gwen patted him on the back. "Now, we pop over there, put a couple lead ones in his noggin, and go back to our lives." What the fuck? He put up with a lot of odd stuff from her, but this was hitting a limit. "We're not doing that," he told her stiffly. She cocked her head. "Why not?" As if asking why murder was wrong was something normal people did. "He's just going to do it again, you know. Cut the problem at the source, I always say." Oh, she was one of those people. Not just a proto-villain, a true villain. He probably shouldn't immediately jump to judgment. Wolverine killed people all the time, and he was one of the best heroes out there. Captain Marvel had no qualms about killing either, and she was Captain Marvel. Killing didn't automatically make someone a villain, but all of them would think twice before suggesting murdering a child, no matter what that child had done. Gwen hadn't even flinched. No, this was wrong, all wrong. She was almost psychopathic in her mannerisms, too eager to murder, and for what? A chance to hang out with Miles Morales? What else would she be willing to do? "I don't kill," he decided. "And if you're supposed to do this, you can't kill either." "Lame," Gwen booed. "The writers are just using that as an excuse to keep Damien's bombing around for more storylines. You've got to fight that morality, man. Fight the editorial." "There's no editorial," he told her, trying to keep his frustration at bay. "There's no comic book. There's no writer. It's just me, and I'm not a killer. Maybe you need to consider what you want, and not whatever fantasy writer wants." Gwen stared at him, and for a second he almost thought that he had gotten through to her, and then her shoulders shook. Fists clenched in frustration. "You think I don't know about what I want every damn day?" she snapped, voice low but brimming over with anger and bitterness. "I live in the apartment of a sociopath and don't even have a fucking bed. I just sit there and every part of me hurts, and all I can do is throw baseballs at a damn wall and think about how this wasn't what I wanted." He pushed too far. She was almost screaming now as she faced around, waving her hands in the air. "I know a lot of shit about everyone here. I know you, I know your parents, I know the kind of fan fiction you write. I have been along for the ride for every fucking super tragedy that has happened in this world, and don't even get me started on the battle world. I probably know more about your backstory than you do. I could tell you more about Wolverine or Blade or any other hero out there, and I would love to hang out with them and have adventures, but I don't think you've noticed, but everyone hates me." He'd forgotten to ask her how she knew all this stuff. Probably should have made that a bigger priority. "Listen, Gwen, People are staring," he managed out, looking around him. "Do you think I care?" she snapped. "I've always been watched. What does it matter? Some random set dressed in red shirts are staring. My whole life is just that now. Just a comic putting me through a paper shredder. I might be more real than the rest of you characters, but I'm probably not much more real anymore either. We're not in a comic book. That's just what you think. Look around you. Think about it for just a little while. Nothing that happens here makes sense if it wasn't a comic book. You're crazy, he whispered, backing away from her. People had gathered all around them, whispering and filming. It seemed that Gwen had only just noticed too, as she moved back, retreating into herself. Yeah, I guess I am, she muttered under her breath, soft enough that only her super hearing could pick up on it. Then she turned round and walked away, the crowd parting to let her through. Sure, Miles had been really pissed off at her by the end there, but he's so bad for her. She deserved better. He hoped that wasn't the last he saw of her. Or, if they did meet, he hoped at least they would be on better terms. Gwen dragged herself through Manhattan and back to Lester's apartment. Before she could touch the knocker, though, she froze. That whole Spider-Man interaction was extremely weird. Hey, she could think more clearly now. Why had that stopped exactly? She probably wasn't going to find out anytime soon, was she? And she found that she was fine with that now. How odd. Turns out screaming existential truths at your hero is very therapeutic. Therapy over and done with, it was now time to face the music. She squared her shoulders, ignored the twinge in every sore muscle in her back, and knocked on the door with every drop of confidence she had left. For several minutes, no one answered. Then the door creaked open to reveal Lester, wearing pajamas and half a pizza slice hanging out of his mouth. Who's this? He mumbled. Gwen, your apprentice, remember? She asked, cracking a weak smile. Please don't throw me out. I swear I tried my level best to get back on time. What are you talking about, kid? He grumbled, opening the door further to let her scurry inside. Didn't particularly expect you to be fine after the explosion I built. Wait, you made that bomb? Did she even have the spoons to be shocked? Yes, as a distraction in case someone didn't attack the base. Then you or the other guy must have set it off. It doesn't matter, we've got the guns anyways. True to his words, there were futuristic alien guns and blasters stacked up in the corner of the living room. Gwen was itching to get her hands on one, even with the betrayal fresh on her mind. You're such an asshole, you know, she burst out, and then froze, waiting for the outburst. Screaming, the pain. Bullseye snorted. What was the first time she had ever heard him laugh? You're funny sometimes, kid, he complimented, going back to his pizza. She felt her shoulders slump, only to tense again as his icy cold voice continued. That was a joke, right? Of course, she agreed, grinning as brightly as she could. You're the best, boss. No assholes here, he nodded, the veneer of cruelty easing. But for how long? It didn't matter, Gwen decided, reaching for a slice of pizza herself. She could live like this. If this was meant to be her storyline, then she could live like this. She'd been living in the same phase for months now, when it would have been done and over with in a few days if it was a small thing. They must have decided that she was better off here, and she will just have to be okay with that. There was a playing card sitting in her things, with Doctor Strange's insignia plastered on the back. She put it in her least used weapons pouch and tried to forget about it. Gwen might be okay with living this, but she could never subject Cecil to it. Chapter 6. Spotlight. Someone had recorded the interaction between Spider-Man and an alleged villain arguing with each other behind a school bus, several feet away from a literal disaster. And they posted it too. Obviously, it went viral that same day. Went up to 1 million views in a week. Miles was going to die from the humiliation. He'd been meaning to go over to Miss Marvel's stomping grounds and ask her about Pink Slayer, so the second he managed to catch her standing on a random roof, he jumped at the chance. Then he saw the phone in her hand, playing a video. A very familiar video. He really was going to die from the humiliation now. Marvel, he spoke up, appearing behind her. She didn't even have the decency to startle, instead turning around and giving him a wave. Hey, Spidey! You didn't by any chance happen to see this video, did you? She asked. Unfortunately, he ground out. The girl mentioned you while you were working together, so I was thinking you would know more about her. Not really, Marvel shrugged. We fought once, she killed a couple cops to cover for Bullseye while he murdered a high-profile witness, and here she hesitated a bit. She called my brother out by name. Miles froze. That wasn't good. Marvel was incredibly protective of her identity. He didn't even know her first name or any of her hobbies. She talked a lot about her fanfics, but if you were to ask what her username was or what the specifics were, she'd climb up tighter than the heavy-duty safes their villains were constantly trying to break into. The only reason he even knew she had a brother at all was because she wanted to brag about her baby nephew. Or, to be specific, she'd one day came into their joint patrols raving about their Batija, and he'd whipped out Google Translate and made a couple assumptions. So he didn't really know that there was a brother at all? And this random girl had. And just by watching this video, I'm getting more context as to how she got that info, Marvel explained. For example, why didn't you tell me that you wrote fanfiction? Oh god, he was going to throw up. What if she found it? What if she was disgusted? What if their entire friendship was ruined by the ridiculous things he'd done when he was young and Homer was stupid? Were you embarrassed? She pressed. It's not something to be embarrassed about. Marvel, can we drop it? He asked, feeling a headache throbbing behind his eyes. Was it smut? Because everyone writes smut, especially in the teens. Marvel, if I knew your real name, I'd be full naming you right now, he told her. Let's just focus on the Gwen issue, please. Fine, Marvel agreed. Wait, her name's Gwen? Yeah, she spelled everything to me. I think she was a fan. Seriously? That was the same shit she told me when we fought. I thought she was delusional or something. Didn't realize there was actual merit to it. I think she's dealing with issues too, Miles agreed, looking back on their whirlwind encounter. And she's having trouble with figuring out what's real and what isn't. But the environment she's in right now isn't healthy, and it's making everything worse. If she got the chance, I think she truly could be a good person. Marvel hummed. So, we should try and get her out of said environment, right? She checked. Do you think you should tell the other Spider-Man about this? Why? Miles frowned. What does he have to do with any of this? Because he knows Deadpool, Miles, Miss Marvel reminded him. And for all he says about not being kid-appropriate, which he isn't, not by a long shot, he's got a pretty hard line against hurting child or child-adjacent people. And Gwen looks like she's a few weeks away from being a minor. And she pays homage to him in her costume and name? No way is he going to let that slide. So what you're saying is, Miles hummed, the cogs turning in his mind, we should stick Deadpool onto Bullseye. Exactly. And are we going to address the fact that means that guy is guaranteed to die a horrible death? No, because I want to sleep at night. Fair enough, he supposed. This entire situation was a clusterfuck and a half. I can't believe you let the video go viral. Bullseye ran for the 20th time, pacing in front of her. Gwen kept her back straight, fighting the urge to cower or fidget or show any other signs of perceivable weakness. A temporary setback, she attempted to tide him over, will never happen again. I know better now. Cecil could have wiped it without breaking a sweat, the traitorous thought came to her mind. It was stupid to want him here with her, she reminded herself. Why would she want her best friend to be exposed to the fear and horror and tension that made up her entire life from now on? What kind of fucked up person would ever ask for that? I thought that you could be trusted, he continued. Again, this was something which had been hysterically repeated multiple times since he had seen their video trending. And I can, Gwen insisted. This was days ago. I'll never do that now. Days is not enough time to build an ironclad instinct, Bullseye roared out. You said all that shit to me about how you were never going to spill anything and how all the secrets were safe, except now it turns out that you're just willing to run your mouth to anyone and everyone except your beloved mentor. At this point, he reached up and grabbed a hand around Gwen's neck. She froze up as her feet were lifted straight off the floor, and she was left hanging there by a single hand he had clutched around her airway. She tried to hold it for as long as she could, but eventually she started to choke and strike out at him fruitlessly with her legs. Please, she gasped. Finally, the grip relaxed, and she collapsed onto the floor. On instinct, she scrambled to the corner with the wall surrounding her on two sides, protecting her. The phantom weight of the fingers still burnt a brand into her throat. I'll be keeping a much tighter leash on you from now on, Bullseye told her. And here I thought we were finally building a rapport. Then he stomped outside, the door slamming behind him. From there, Gwen was thrown headfirst into a much more rigorous schedule. They did several jobs a day, and much more diverse jobs than normal, too. Territory control, debt collecting, culling rivals, even just regular old hits that they weren't meant to question. It was easy enough. It all led back to killing, and killing. She didn't hover around to keep an eye on the corpses if she could help it. Otherwise, the smell of Cecil's cooling rot would layer itself thick over her tongue. But this was what she had signed up for, she reminded herself, gritted her teeth and buckled down. Weeks passed, and she became better, even better than she had been before Miles Morales had happened. Once, when she was feeling particularly brave, she had gone onto one of the Free Alliance violence forums that Ronnie frequented to find jobs for her clients. Pink Slayer was mentioned there several times as Bullseye's companion. People were praising her, giving her high reviews. Efficient, charming, young, they dutifully reported, good at subterfuge, suited for evading police, more potential than Bullseye for more varied jobs. That last one made her puff up with pride. Fucking hell, Lester, she could do things that he couldn't, that weren't directly linked to her origin. Has an interesting personality. That immediately brought her down to earth. An interesting personality. That was one way to say it, wasn't it? When you started screaming in front of a superhero and let yourself get videotaped talking about how the things you knew were turning your mind inside out, that hinted more towards severe mental illness, not an interesting personality. Would this quirk of hers affect her standing in the Hitman world? No, otherwise Deadpool would have never made it. As if sensing her thoughts, the next comment read out, A Deadpool type. Hey, she just found that comparison. No way so many people thought she was like him. Right? Well, anyway, she didn't know what they meant by her being a Deadpool type, so she kept on reading. Turns out the Deadpool types were the ones who fraternized with superheroes without expecting any payment from them. These types were unreliable and untrustworthy, and probably going to turn on you on a dime because of stupid things like moral codes and power of friendship. Deadpool, specifically, managed to sidestep this issue by being the deadliest man on Earth. Gwen Poole didn't get that courtesy. She had to be better than that. Slowly, Lester seemed to relax again. She was more forthcoming with information to him, and more ruthless against her victims. He seemed to forget the incident entirely, allowed her to pick up missions by herself that she executed efficiently and professionally. Gwen learned to build up a network with the people she worked with, learned to recognize the mob bosses and the weapons dealers and the drug runners that sought her services the most, memorized their rivals and goals and their stances for each other, until she was well-versed enough to play them off each other without a second thought. It wasn't just about understanding the playing field. She also needed to have the arsenal to run down any opponents. As she did more jobs, she got more money. Every single paycheck was immediately reinvested into building up that arsenal. Gwen got bigger guns, better holsters, collapsible knives that could be concealed easily and then expand into the size of a katana, the small ones, of wakizashi, like that, but think more box cutter. She loved it. It scared the shit out of people when she whipped it out. The effect would be so much cooler if she wasn't wearing all those blocky padding, so she looked even smaller and less likely to be holding any weapons whatsoever, but they couldn't have everything they wanted in life, now could they? So Lester was letting her do solo runs now, like, all the time. It was on one such run that led her back into subways. She hadn't gone back since the Miles debacle. How she managed to avoid the biggest public transport system in the city without a vehicle was a miracle, but she had managed it. And then one day she was walking past the subway station, and people came pouring out, screaming in horror. Gwen's muscles immediately locked, thrown into the fight or flight instinct. There didn't seem to be anyone she'd worked with before behind the chaos. In fact, there didn't seem to be a single villain attacking the vulnerable crowd. "What's going on?" she asked, snagging the shoulder of a passing man.
"Snakes!"
he screamed, nigh hysterical.
"There's snakes in the subway!"
Sheesh, that was less ominous than the movie she'd watched. Didn't quite add the tension of being suspended in a metal box several thousand feet in the air. This wasn't a time to be giving needless criticism. There were snakes in the subway, and only Gwen was there to save the day. Even though, technically speaking, she wasn't meant to be playing hero. Not anymore. She'd learned to accept her lot in life and give up on stupid wish fulfillment daydreams. But there wasn't anyone there. No Spider-Man, no Iron Man, not even Nova. This was New York City, but even then, no heroes came. It was only her. Gwen sprinted down the stairway, barely planning anything out. There were snakes, but how hard could it be? She just had to shoot them, and they'd scatter if they knew what was good for them. Except when she got into the station and looked around. She found no snakes. The whole place was deserted. "What the fuck?" she whispered, backing away. Something had lured her here. Something malicious. So, she really does have a heroic side, a woman hissed into her ear. A woman's voice, comparatively young, but somehow dry as bone, conjuring the image of a withered skeleton. Gwen whirled around, gun at the ready. There was a tall woman looming above her, face covered with a mask with one giant eye taking up the entirety of her upper face. Her mouth and lower face were exposed, revealing ashy blue skin. "Who are you?" she asked, holding the rifle up to aim directly at the strange woman's chest. "I am the terrible Eye," she announced, voice rippling with hidden power. "And we have been hired to end your life." Ah, shit. The hitman had become the hitman. But who even hated Gwen enough to send a demon assassin after her? Sure, she was going up in the world, but she was still relatively small fry. If they had a problem with anyone, it should be with Bullseye. Why would the protege character be the one directly targeted in the first place? It should be the protagonist front and center every time. Hey, maybe she really was the main character after all. Then another bit about that ominous speech struck her. "Wait, you said we, didn't you?" she asked hesitantly. There was footsteps suddenly coming from her left, and before she could even turn around to face the newcomer, a pair of black boots entered her direct vision, delivering a kick to her solar plexus that sent her veering directly into the wall. "This one isn't particularly bright, is she?" the owner of the boots asked in a thick French accent, landing lightly on the ground. No, hold the phone. This wasn't any black boot-wearing, awesome kick-having, almost offensive Frenchman. This was Batroc the Leaper. Gwen's gaze shifted to the other girl. Batroc was a very recognizable villain. He wouldn't show up for any stock grunt operation. This girl must be working for someone who's made quite the name for themselves in the comic book world. But who, though? "Looks like she hasn't had quite enough yet," Batroc cackled, readying himself for another kick. The girl held up her hands, silhouetted by ancient magic. "No, Batroc. Allow me." She summoned a bolt of energy to smite Gwen where she stood, but luckily Gwen managed to get a hold of her senses and move out of the way. They'd gotten the advantage this time, but no way was she going to let them keep it. She whipped out her most trustworthy guns and immediately began firing shots at the two. Several hit, but only in non-vital spots, like she had intended. She didn't want to kill them, just cause enough pain and damage to stop them from being able to attack her. Her aim is better than anticipated, Terrible Eye coughed out, bullet wound going straight through her hand. Who are you working with? Gwen finally got the chance to ask, lifting the gun threateningly towards her. Instead of the girl, however, it was Batroc who spoke up. MODOK, he hissed, barely managing to get through the pain of the bullet, very much wedged into his humorous brow. The mechanized organism designed only for killing? Gwen asked in disbelief. That MODOK put out a hit on me. What did I ever do to him? Then she started laughing hysterically as the full meaning of that hit her brain. That weird head guy tried to kill me and failed? That's incredible. And sad for him too. That's just so sad. More incredulous laughter followed, slowly making her victims more and more insulted as they continued to hemorrhage blood onto the filthy subway station floor. Hold on, I gotta tell Lester all about this, she wheezed, hopping up into the false ceiling above to get some privacy as she opened her phone and dialed Bullseye's number. It rang 4 times, and she almost thought it had gone to voicemail until he picked up. Did you fulfill the contract, kid? He asked, tiredness lining every syllable. Yeah, she agreed. This is actually about what happened after. The situation I just dealt with? You're not gonna believe it. She was almost vibrating with excitement. Well, I can't believe it until you tell me what's up. He admired impatiently, so spill. Okay, listen to this, she managed out between chortles. MODOK sent killers after me. Instead of the hysterical laughter or even the amused puff of air, she was instead greeted by grim silence. Team MODOK, huh? He wondered. I've heard a lot about them. Very effective bunch. Whoa, hit the brakes. What? These guys had a rep, and they were a full team. A nagging detail immediately jumped out to her. A team, not a duo. There were more than 2 of them. She jumped down hurriedly into the train station, but it was too late. There was a big bearded guy in a pristine lab coat standing up there, giving Batroc and Terrible Eye brightly colored chemicals. They both looked much better than they had when she shot them, and Batroc was even already standing on his feet. Fuck, they had a healer. She hadn't thought about that. Lucky shot, Terrible Eye growled at her, already aware of Gwen's presence. Her 2 teammates turned around and immediately got into battle stances as well. Next time, you will not be so lucky, Batroc added. Gwen gulped and took a step back. No good. Already they were shooting forwards, intent on grabbing her. She bolted out of the subway station. The 3 members of Team MODOK followed closely after. Chapter 7. MODOK's Unexpected Savior. Gwen dodged another kick from Batroc. The wall he hit instead crumpled like paper. He was stronger than she had thought from the comics. Guess Captain America can make even the strongest men look weak in comparison. She tried to make another run for it, but she was blocked off by a bolt of magic from Terrible Eye, who had been perfectly restored. She was hurting Gwen, keeping her in Batroc's crosshairs and setting him up for the kill, while the medic provided support from behind. Out of nowhere, it seemed, the thought came to her that they were the perfect adventuring party. And who was the weakest link in every adventuring party? The healer. Gwen vaulted over Terrible Eye's head, her guns drawn. Behind her, Terrible Eye gave a shrill shriek, and Batroc screamed. But she didn't hear him properly with all the blood pumping to her ears. All her focus was on the bearded man in the lab coat, and the gun she had pressed to his temple. Normally, she would have taken off the safety first thing, but she kept it on this time, so that she could click it off menacingly. The look of fear that flashed through his face when he felt the vibration of the movement through his head. I didn't want to do this, she whispered, turning around to look at the others. But you all forced my hand. Lies, lies, lies. She didn't give a single fuck about this man who was ready to kill her for a paycheck. They asked for this to happen. But pretending that she was desperate would put them on edge. Nothing was more dangerous than a cornered animal. She learned that from Lester when he had underestimated the son of one of his targets, and the boy had hurled an axe at his head. Take care of how you proceed, kid, Batroc warned her, reaching forward. Gwen held the gun at the healer's temple steady, keeping the finger threateningly light over the trigger. At the same time, her other hand aimed another pistol directly at Batroc and fired a shot at his feet. The recoil from that one reverberated into her hostage, who quivered even harder. Terrible Eye had her eyes clutched over her mouth. She must not have been in the business for long. Gwen could exploit that. The problem was Batroc. He seemed to think that Gwen was bluffing and took a sharp step forward. She wasn't bluffing. He'd learned his lesson for ever thinking that Gwen would bluff. She made sure to make direct eye contact with the man as her finger began to tighten around the trigger, so that she could see the moment he learned his lesson. She had learned that lesson from Lester, too. Eye contact makes the violence so much more personal. That was when the feeling of wrongness began to swamp through her body. First, a soft, subtle feeling, but it grew quickly, until it was a klaxon siren, so loud and shrill and clear that she could almost hear the words of the problem. Wait. She could hear the words. And against her will, her wrist flicked to the side. The bullet embedded itself in the wall right behind Megatoni. Gwen froze, looking at her traitorous hand. What was that? Team Modoc was similarly frozen, staring at the scene with bated breath, even as smoke continued to rise from the barrel of the gun. Had they seen it? The way the entire world flashed pink and weird? Did it make even a difference? In that instant, the weirdest, most snapshot memories that had flickered through her. Cut up memories that didn't make any sense. Emotions that she shouldn't be feeling right now. And yet, when she looked at their pathetic little squad, all she could feel was an intense feeling of protectedness. It must be a spell that the terrible eye had managed to plant on her. Who knows when, but at that point, Gwen didn't care. She couldn't kill Team Modoc. It gave her a weakness they will be all too willing to exploit. Best to play it as a bluff. Pretend that was what she was going to do the whole time. I'm sparing you this once, she sniffed, holstering her guns to put her hands on her hips. I'll leave you alone and you guys dip. Get a paycheck somewhere else. No idea about the other two, but editorial knows you're better than this at Batroc. How about I refer you to one of my brokers? It's freelance work, but at least it's not hopping to the word of some big-headed guy who doesn't even understand his position in the moral compass of this world. The three blinked at her, looking absolutely baffled. Mercy? Batroc hazarded. Don't even mention it, Gwen told him, turning around to walk out of the door. Wait, Pink's Flare. Where will you go now? Terrible Eye asked after her. I must warn you, we already know of your association with Bullseye. We will hunt you down again, using him as a telltale sign. Yeah, well, your day is folly, sister, Gwen called over her shoulder. I'm not in Bullseye's lot anymore. Consider this my resignation announcement. She needed to get her head straight after that pink flash incident. Everything felt wrong and unbalanced, as if some other creature had temporarily accessed her mind and spoken to her, through her own voice. This was what time travel felt like, didn't it? Either that or prophetic visions, which were really the same thing if you really thought about it. Either way, one thing Gwen was absolutely sure of, she couldn't stay with Bullseye any longer. This was her breaking point. She was only hanging out with him out of her own self-interest. And suddenly that put a target on her back and assassins were after her neck? Fuck no, she was so out. Her hands drifted to her pockets, where she kept Cecil's card. When nothing met her hand, her heart hitched for a second. Before remembering, she didn't take the card along to missions where they were liable to have her pockets checked. No need to let people think she had any sentimental attachment to it, even though she categorically did. It was back at Lester's apartment. No sweat. She'd break in to grab it after she had her affairs in order. Speaking of affairs, how the fuck was she going to play this? Where could she go? The documentation she needed had been Lester's major control over her. How was she going to combat that? Well, there was a reasonably high amount of money in her bag, high enough to get her a fake ID. But she didn't want any crappy ID that could be encountered by basic database searches. If she needed to pay up for it, she demanded the best. She needed the pink-haired prick studying in the Jean Grey School of Higher Learning. Quentin Quire was having a regular day. Take classes, do homework, eat meals, and train and train and train. There was a lot of training when you were the strongest psychic of your generation. So for some reason, Jean Grey was absolutely certain that he was going to implode any day with the force of all the sensory inputs he took in all the time. No matter how much you tried to tell her that his control was impeccable, she just didn't listen. He was just about ready to crash once the day was over. A new video game was lying on his desk, just begging for him to slip on his headphones and immerse himself into the tinny music and fast-paced gameplay. He didn't have any patience for anyone right now, especially not annoying people banging away at his door and demanding he make them a passport or driver's license or whatever the newest fad was. No, he told the blonde girl with the pink ombre the second he relented to her, insisted knocking and opened the door. No, listen, dude, it's important. The girl, was she a new student? Quentin didn't remember seeing her around. He didn't care to find out either, as he shut the door again mid-conversation. He should have turned back to his game console, ignored whatever shit show had struck the school this time. But instead, his mind kept wandering back to the girl. It was strange, he decided. She didn't give off any thoughts. Not that he was trying very hard to read her mind or anything. It's just a sense you develop as time goes on, scraping over surface thoughts and seeing what they were thinking. And this girl, she had no surface thoughts at all. Yet she was definitely organic, he could tell that much, but nothing past it. This time focusing hard, he telepathically zoomed in on her. Still nothing. It was only peering through the minds of people around her that she could be perceived. She was more of a conundrum than he had thought at first. Then he looked deeper into the mind of a passing student whose attention was snagged on her. Hey, the pink-haired girl was yelling at his chosen set of eyes. Do you want to know what Quentin Quire's actual first name is? No, she wouldn't. There was no possible way she'd know that. It had to be a bluff.
Sure, the person replied, confusion echoing through the connection he had built between them. Great, and because I'm 55% sure he's piggybacking off your brain, I want you to know that this is out of pure spite, because he isn't getting me a fake ID. Anyways, his real name is Quintavious. Not a bluff, red alert! He sprinted out of the room, telepathically grabbing the annoying little snitch before she let the secret loose. She's lying, he managed to tell the student, his chest heaving as the pink-haired girl wriggled uselessly in the air. The student took in the scene, looking skeptical. You know what? Sure, he decided. I'm not getting involved in this. Is she a new student? No, Quentin replied. He had no way to explain it, but nothing about her was mutant. The girl, however, looked mildly contemplative. I think I'm gonna make it work, she decided. Sounds like a very me thing. Okay, crazy girl thought being mutant was a fashion accessory, worrying and problematic behavior. He tried to stay calm as he lowered her to the ground and marched away. At least he didn't have to tell her to follow as she trotted alongside him, grinning all the way. I knew that would work, she sang-song victoriously. Quentin wanted to scramble her brains. He had the feeling it wouldn't work. How was she doing that, anyway? It wasn't like he was a stranger to the idea of erasing one's psychic presence, but if a psychic of that caliber had popped up, Quentin, as the only Omega-level telepath of his generation, should have heard of her. And she definitely wasn't subtle in any other part of her life, so what gives? Still, he decided to ask her outright. Are you a psychic? I can't read you, he blurts out. Communication sucked. It was better when you knew exactly what the other person was thinking. How did the normies last a day talking like this? Against all odds, the girl's mouth stretched into a grin. I have telepathic protection, she crowed. That's so second plot convenient. If I give you documentation, will you please leave me alone? Quentin begged. I mean, no promises, because the author might want to drag you into future projects, whether you like it or not, but I'll try my best. Signs of delusion were becoming more and more apparent with every passing moment. How wonderful. The sooner he got her out of his life, the better. So, what kind of identification do you want? He asked, telekinetically putting away piles of laundry and unfinished assignments without lifting a finger. Everything, the girl replied. Do whatever you want, brainwash whoever you have to, just make sure that there's an ironclad case for me being a person who has existed in this dimension before this. God damn, of course it had to be something like this. Dimensional hopping crazies interrupting his game night looking for proof of his existence. Couldn't have been something simple like a pilot's license. Trying to keep his very short fuse under control, he looked at her flatly. That's a lot of work, and I'm going to have to be really thorough. But you'll help me, she pointed out. Why? Because we've already spent too much time on this conversation to be a cutaway rejection gag, she replied, as if the answer was obvious. And then she was reaching into her penguin bag and slapped a veritable brick of green paper onto the table. Also, I'm willing to pay the price of it, she added. I'm going to help you, but not because of the nonsense you said at first, Quire conceded, tucking the wad of cash underneath his mattress as he stared her down. To her credit, she returned the gaze, not even concerned in the slightest. I'm going to have to know your name, he told her, and other details about your health, academic, and socioeconomic status to properly fill out all the paperwork. Oh, I'm Gwen, she introduced. Gwen Poole, and I'm 19? 18? Huh, that's weird. It's nebulous in my head. As if they don't really know. I'll just put you in as 19, he decided. If she ever wanted to dabble in some underage drinking, at least she wouldn't have to torment other fake ID dealers over it. They got to work, building together a comprehensive backstory for Gwen in this dimension. A lot like building a D&D character, except boring. Finally, hours after the sun had disappeared into the horizon, and his eye had begun itching fiercely from the tiredness, did he look up. This is going to take a while. Can you wait a week? Make it 3 days, and I double it, she bargained. No amount of money will change my physical limitations. It's either a week or you get out. Fine, it was worth a shot. Gwen shook her head. I'll see you in exactly 7 days, Quintavious. Fuck, she really did know his name. And if you try to spill the beans to anyone else, I'm going to murder you in your sleep, he yelled at her, even as she tried to make a hasty escape through the window. I'll hold you to that, Gwen called back, disappearing from the pane. A couple seconds later, he saw her running through the campus grounds, being chased by security. The second she was out of this fucking school, the better, in his opinion. That weird muffled feeling that struck her thoughts had completely melted away. Gwen didn't entirely see the correlation, but the fact that it happened thrice was a bad sign. Foreshadowing for a future arc? Very optimistic of the writers, considering she had done pretty much nothing this entire time. Still, no one else seemed to be feeling it, not even Quentin Quire, was supposed to be a telepath, and hence, in tune with his feelings or something. Miles, she'd excuse not picking up on some weird mentor tricks. She loved the guy, but Jesus fucking Christ, he had to start listening to his Spire sense more often. But Quire? Unthinkable. Still, she had 7 days to kill, and what should she do in that time? There was plenty of stuff, nothing in the area, but if she train hopped back to New York, she could tackle a lot of things that she had been building up into her to-do list. MODOK had to be threatened into leaving her alone. If going for his cronies hadn't done the trick, and a new source of income had to be found. She needed to get Cecil back, move out of Lester's apartment, head off the Bullseye confrontation so that he wouldn't get the drop on her, and rebrand herself from the ground up. Speaking of, she knew exactly what she should do while Choir wrapped up the paperwork problems. Wade, you need to understand why this is a problem, right? Peter stressed, looking at his begrudging friend. Thankfully, Matt was here to back him up, or else he wouldn't have the courage for this intervention. Not really, Wade shrugged. I don't see how it's my place to put up a fuss. Usually, interventions were about self-care and breaking problematic behavior, not whatever this clusterfuck was. A spiral of gossip and interventions, apparently. Because the conversation had gone from Miles and Miss Marvel to Peter and the weird, possibly a criminal costume maker Matt was friends with, and led all the way back, in the most unexpected manner, to Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool. And Peter would love to say good things about Deadpool. He had strong morals, sometimes, and was friendly, also only sometimes. And he'd been in the Adventures, which was such a stupid decision. He still couldn't believe that Cap had okayed that, and... Okay, so Deadpool was just there. Neither good nor evil, but overwhelming heaps of both. Balancing it better than anyone else in the business. Except for now, because he was coming off really, really evil right now. Matt especially looked like he was about to throw Wade off a bridge. What do you mean it's not your place? He growled, pulling off no-nonsense rage much better than Peter ever could. I mean that Bullseye might be a bro, but that means that I don't get to criticize the way he runs things, Wade explained. And if I go running around throwing my lot in with Spider-Man over little things like this, it's finally going to force me into picking a side. And that's sad and conducive to business. And you're saying you couldn't give a fuck about all the victims? Peter demanded. Petey pie, I'm an assassin. No shit, I don't give a fuck about victims, Wade dismissed. Matt, in a moment of astute emotional torture, held out a printed picture of the girl in question. Peter was thrown for a moment, seeing her frozen in relaxed delight, even as the real one suffered through extreme torment. Gwenpool was a young woman, barely more than a girl. If he didn't know better, he could have easily thought she was a high school sophomore. In the image, she was sitting in her pastel pink, painfully Deadpool-inspired costume with the mask off, grinning at the costume so wide that her eyes were creased shut, even as clumps of blonde and pink hair stuck to her cheeks in a tangle. Wade faltered upon seeing her photo once more, or their professional respect and live and let live attitude melting away bit by bit. She's very young for the lifestyle, he allowed, at first, but obviously has some potential, or Bullseye wouldn't keep her around. But she's a fan of mine, and I should be doing my due diligence as a role model, and... He was crumbling before their eyes. Peter took savage joy from that. Okay, fine, you win, Wade relented, finally. I'll give him a talk, and if that doesn't work, I'll beat the shit out of him. By all means, beat the shit out of him, even if it works.
Chapter 8. And boom. New York City. A place for misfits and failed experiments to gather and soothe their egos by donning tights and masks and capes. A city that bred crime like it bred annoyingly bright superheroes to deal with said crimes. A thrilling sort of equilibrium, balanced by a hair's breadth. Except for today, where the balance had shifted towards crime, when a young millionaire heir's birthday party had been broken up by a gang of masked men packing serious heat. Instantly, the story was all over major news networks, started trending on Twitter within the hour. Condolences had already started being drafted for the parents, and emergency services hadn't even had the chance to respond yet. It was sheer pandemonium. Tick-tock, little boy, the ringleader of this whole scheme sneered, waving his gun uncomfortably close to the face of the boy. And he would be damned if the horror of this wouldn't get him on the map. Mommy and Daddy'd better hurry up. The little nepo bastard scrunched his face up and sobbed, grating on the ears, but his parents sure would love it. This would be a great incentive for them to chuck in a couple $1,000 more. Now, regarding the rest of the children, he sniffed at the eye the children shoved in the back, all gagged and tied up to make sure they didn't kick up a fuss. Each one was dressed in pretty clothes, all designer shit, and silken handkerchiefs. One of them was even wearing a fucking suit. Who makes suits for 11-year-olds? These folks had better be in some big money. Old or new, it didn't matter to him. Just that he could line up and his boys' pockets with it. Check 'em and see if there's anything we can sell on them, he directed his henchmen. Rings and lockets and shiny little jewels, that sort of stuff. And watches, boss? Yes, and fucking watches.
Why did he have to clarify these things? It was so obvious what kind of things were valuable and what weren't. He wouldn't have these problems if he had sprung for the good mercs like Deadpool or Batroc. Wasn't Bullseye making quite the name for himself recently? He had this new apprentice or something, he wasn't sure. It didn't matter anyway. He couldn't afford their rates. Right now. After this ransom, however, it would be a very different story. All dreams of grandeur he had were cut off by a blur of pink and white and yellow that jumped out of the air vent and slammed a foot directly into his jaw, sending him sprawling. Everyone froze, trying to look at the interloper standing tall in front of them all. A petite white girl with stick-thin arms and a truly pathetic fighting stance stared him down, her foot ready for another kick. She wore what appeared to be an exact replica of Deadpool's costume, except pink where it was red and white where it was black, and yellow lightning bolts arcing their way up both sleeves, meeting in the middle to create the initials GP. "What the fuck?" someone whispered, looking at this strange apparition. "The name's Gwenpool," she announced, putting her hands on her hips, "and I'm sorry, but you're going to have to break this little party up." "And who's gonna make us?" one of his boys asked. Good thing it was him, too, because the ringleader's mouth was too sore for him to ask the obvious himself. Was this Deadpool's little sister, or some sort of hyper-obsessed fan? Either way, she followed the Poole method. Then that meant she was in the merc business. Probably had been hired by the parents. Maybe he could sway her with the promise of money. Unless there were more mercs backing her up, they couldn't bribe them all. "I am," she replied simply. "Me and the power of this machine gun." Jesus fuck, where had she stored that huge thing all this time? Everyone scared as she began firing indiscriminately at the scene, the weight of the gun so drastic that even she had difficulty staying upright as she spun around. And yet, with all the shaking and the screaming, somehow none of the kids got caught in the crossfires. Bullet holes peppered the walls, and most of the gang was left fallen, given their fair share of fatal and non-fatal but still hurts like a bitch wounds. But no kid got hurt. The ringleader whimpered, curled up around the scorching metal wedged within his ribs, sending warm, thick liquid oozing from his body. Gwenpool stepped over the remnants of his boys to come to a stop in front of him. She crouched down, looking him right in the eye. "You aren't going to recover from this, ever," she whispered, loud enough for him to hear. Tears of pain and fear spilled out from his eyes as he shook violently. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to. "Please, don't do this to him," echoed quick and painless. What did it matter in the end? Dead was dead, and he didn't want it. "But I'm not going to," relief struck him. He wanted to cry tears of joy even as she continued. "You're gonna have to sit in your own blood, feeling your life drip, drip, drip away, and simply hope that someone cares about you enough to come save you. You know why?" She was waiting for a response, so he had to force his cracked lips to form the question. "Why?" Gwenpool pulled her mask off to give him the full force of her megawatt smile. "Because I'm a hero now." And then she was springing up and bouncing over to the kidnapped children. "Alrighty, kiddos, let's get you home." The kidnapping target wailed in outrage, as if he recognized the girl, but Gwenpool didn't give a shit, heaving him over her shoulder and dragging him out of the building, hurting all the other children along with her. Curse that Gwenpool. "Take care, Richie," Gwen trilled, ruffling the rescued victim's hair. "Hope we don't run into each other again." He glared at her, attempting to reach forward and bite her. She whipped her hand back before he could do any real damage. "I never want to see you again either," he screamed. "I thought I was going to meet Spider-Man, or someone cool. Why did my parents get you again?" "They didn't," Gwen told him plainly, a statement so bland that she shocked him into silence. "No one hired me," she explained. "I saw you needed help, so I came to help." He blinked, shaken. "Oh, go to your parents, give them a big hug, and appreciate what you have," she suggested, elbowing him through the giant crowd of reporters and cops and firemen, straight to where his parents were standing, sobbing hysterically. They rushed over excitedly, sweeping Richard into his arms. "Oh, my baby!" The mother cradled him close. "Thank you, miss, thank you so much," the father stammered, his hands in iron grip on the boy. Then he did a double take as he realized who he was talking to. "Wait, you're that merc. Gwen." "See ya," Gwen quickly bowed out. She would have backflipped away, but she had no gymnastics training or upper body strength whatsoever. Instead, she went with the good old grapple gun. Maybe she should have been more into DC, because she could kick ass with her grapple skills there. "Someone stop that fugitive!" A police officer screamed, and bullets whizzed past her ears. They didn't land a single hit, her instincts honed by all the time she spent dodging Bullseye's shots. She had better aim than all these people combined. It was almost sad. But if she could put up a good fight against these people, then her chances against Bullseye were looking a little better. She needed all the confidence she could get, because she was not looking forward to this confrontation. Bullseye's apartment remained as unchanged as normal. Gwen didn't know why she expected him to have burnt it down in rage, but it wasn't. When she snuck in through the window, there weren't any broken windows or missing plates, or even leftovers rotting away. It was all perfectly fine. Stable. She gulped and made her way to the storage room and her little nest, snatched up all her stuff and shoved it into a garbage bag she'd brought along with her. Every trinket and scrap of paper and Luke's blunted knife was thrown into it without a thought. She never wanted to come back and didn't want to leave behind anything she might regret. The playing card with Cecil's soul inside it was stuck under a stack of raggedy blankets that she had never washed. She had it stored in a plastic card carrier to protect it from any water damage or fungus or any other decay. Once she cracked it open, the card seemed to be in pristine condition, fresh out of the pack, and then stabbed into a person's eyeball. But it wasn't damaged further than that. It would work just fine for her purposes. Putting it safely in a pocket close to her chest, she began shoving more of her personal belongings into the trash bag. Any firearms she discovered, which were many, she put into her penguin bag. Once the entire place had been cleared out, all that was left were a pile of faded blankets and a single depressed mattress. She wasn't desperate enough to be taking those. Garbage bag stuffed full, and penguin arsenal weighing down her shoulders, she walked into the rest of the room. She'd wrapped up all her tasks in his house, and now, what was the bitchiest way to say goodbye? She settled on wandering over to the mini-fridge, digging through it, cool as a cucumber. There was never much in there, but this time she had hit the jackpot. Leftover pizza and a box full of takeaway noodles. Too much for one person, so he must have been ordering for her as well. It was kind of pathetic, but in a way that made Gwen grin sadistically. She started digging into the least spoiled stuff, leaving the door of the fridge open, like a dig. The framing was all worth it when the front door clicked open, swinging out to reveal the navy blue costume of Bullseye. Immediately the man zeroed in on her, sitting cross-legged beside the fridge and eating his pizza. "You've been gone for a while," he noted, his voice dangerously calm, like clear skies when there was a hurricane alert going on. "Wow, I didn't notice," she drawled, taking care to chew with her mouth open. She saw the way his mouth twitched in disgust. Good, she disgusted herself. But this was necessary, or she would be scared of him for the rest of her life. She had to burn away all the trauma, once and for all. "Don't play games with me," he snarled. "I'm not playing," she replied right back. "What are you gonna do, stab me?" It was hubris speaking, of course, because he did pull out a handful of ninja stars to hurl at her. Gwen swore and ducked, feeling something nick into her skin and leave shallow gashes behind. "You just have to stay quiet and do your part," he screamed at her, all his ominous lurking discarded. "Why do you have to be fucking contrarian, you little pipsqueak?" "Maybe because I don't want to work with you, dipshit," she screamed right back, gun in hand. It was a battle against thrown weapons and firearms, and surprisingly, the firearms weren't an immediate win for her. "Couldn't we do this in a less dramatic way?" she asked, dodging a kick to the face and a dart to the ankle. "What, were you expecting a severance package?" "I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but it would have been a nice surprise," she replied, hanging upside down from his grip. "And you expect me to be nice after you've been nothing but the most deceptive little minion I could have asked for?" "Not really," she admitted. "But I guess you're right about one thing. I'm pretty deceptive." Even upside down, it wasn't any trouble whipping out the card she had hidden away and throwing it to the ground, resisting the urge to call out an anime catchphrase. "Cecil, you up for some vengeance?" And the card floated up, encased in blue vapor, until it got slightly above 5 feet off the ground, where the vapor solidified into the blue, translucent figure of Cecil. It was a wonder why Bullseye had frozen and simply watched as the transformation took place, but it was lucky he did, because it was just the right time for her to shoot the grapple gun directly at Bullseye, pinning his hands together. Cecil blinked, settling down to hover slightly above the ground. What? "I thought you said I was going to get revenge." "And you did," she assured him, "by being a distraction." "This isn't over," Bullseye roared. She kicked him in the head in a move she'd picked up from Batroc during their brief time together. It was an instant knockout. "I wanted to do that," Cecil lamented, waving his feet over Lester's head. It went right through. "Sorry, man," she offered in small consolation. Wow, that wasn't the fight I thought it would be. It's kind of underwhelming." "Maybe because he wasn't that scary in the first place," Cecil suggested. "And it was just the way he treated you that made it feel like he's super scary." "But that's not good for comic sales, Cecil," she whined. "We gotta make it a cool last dance." "Like what?" he asked skeptically. Wade paced in front of Lester's apartment, unsure of how to explain this whole situation to the guy. You didn't mess with other people's hiring practices. This was the #1 rule of Merc business. That was how you lost customers. And if there was one thing the deadliest man in the world couldn't afford, it was not to have customers willing to pay for that service. It was his only skill. The fuck was he supposed to do without it? But he'd seen the kid on TV, in videos, and she was a riot. And she didn't deserve to have the pool spirit squeezed out by that maniac. An admittedly funny maniac, but you understood. Also, Matt was threatening a team divorce over this, and sure, he was always doing that, but this time it was serious. So he had to shut up and knock on that door. And knock he did. Once, twice, thrice. No answer. Lester, he called through the mail slot. Lester, I know you're in there. I've had cameras on your door for weeks now. But no one answered. He simply kicked the door open. It wasn't even locked, the fool. Except when he walked in, Lester wasn't standing inside. He was tied to a punching bag and dangling in the middle of the room, a nasty bump on his head, and a girl in front of him. He knew without double-checking that this girl was Gwen Poole. Her costume was a little different, but it was still distinctive enough to not be confused by anyone else's. It didn't stop him from being shocked. What? Who? I was supposed to be saving you, goddammit! He kicked the door shut. So much for that dramatic hero entrance. What makes you think I can do it myself? She asked, tilting her head at him like she'd made a particularly smart-ass comment. I just decided to ditch this loser. As you should, he found himself nodding. You've got spunk, kid. I can respect that. And you're... She looked him up and down carefully. Buff, I guess. What's your shtick again? Like a dagger through his heart. He forced himself to laugh despite the pain. I think I like you, kid. Think of me as a mentor, if you will. To being a mercenary, sometimes hero who's in the know. In the know? Yeah, he gestured the words they were made up of. The fourth wall. Ah, gotcha, she winked, rushing past him. And I suppose if you're in the know, you wouldn't mind this? In the next second, he wasn't entirely sure how, but she had one of his katanas in her hands, twisting it around experimentally. What? Hey, give that back! Wade patted himself down, confirming that, yeah, she really took the katana strapped to his back, and this wasn't a replica trick or something. He'd fallen for that one before. Never again. Sorry, bud. You should know the importance of legacy items, she called, rushing out of the window on the other end of the corridor and swinging herself out. He sure hoped she had a stolen web slinger or something, otherwise he'd really hate for potential to go out like that. Slamming into concrete moments after exacting petty revenge was very on brand for a one-time Deadpool clone. He hoped she wasn't one of those. She had a lot of main character potential. A phone was ringing. His phone. It was Matt. Yes? Did you talk to him? Nah, she had him strung up in his own kitchen and was making a break for it by the time I got there. Oh, good for her. Yeah. Am I off the hook now? No, you still should have done something. There's no fucking winning with you hero types, is there? The lease to Cecil's uncle's apartment had run out, so they couldn't crash there. Just as well, because Gwen was 75% sure the rotting corpse was still in the closet, and she wasn't entirely sure how Cecil would feel about that. But they needed a place to stay, and thankfully, after much pleading, Ronnie had let them take the couch at hers for a few nights, just as long as they earned their keep. I'll take any job, she told her seriously. Well, any non-murder, non-criminal freelance violence job. Is there a market for that? Ronnie will find something, the woman sighed, typing away at her keyboard. Gwen sighed too, taking up a seat at the counter, dressed in a brand new costume the woman had managed to make as a rush job. She had an identity, a new costume, her best friend was back, and her profession as both a hero and a merc was more solid than ever. She'd gotten everything she could ask for in a comic debut.
Yeah, you may want to look at the screen now.
Wait, what?
Okay, so I spent literal months on this, only to finish this in the middle of literal exam season. I hope you enjoyed because I really liked the effects and special ways I managed to bring out the pop-up boxes from the original fic to life. I wrote the original fic, I mentioned this, Bullseye cut, I wrote that. If you want to read it, the link is in the description. I'll also put timestamps of every time there was changing text on screen. I know that reading it is, like, no one's looking at the screen for Podfic. So, yeah, I'll put up a pinned comment for that. And I want to say that I'll be doing Podfic soon, but I don't really see it happening since it's summer and my recording space easily goes into like 100 degrees. There's one fic that I really, really want to do. It's this X-Men Searchlight fic that I mentioned before. But otherwise, I really won't be doing anything unless you've got anything to recommend. And yeah, thanks for staying this long. It's 2 hours. Good job. And now I'm going to like stop waffling around and end this finally.